G'day, I'm Sean and welcome to the CarExpert Podcast. We're back for another week and we've got the original three here, James and Scott, finally back on the couch together. How you guys been?
I'm missing you guys, to be honest.
Yeah.
Every Monday I've been thinking about what I can do and where I can be, and it's not been here.
It's not been here, mate.
No.
I wish I could say the same, but we've carried on regardless.
Yeah, I was going to say the same.
Yes, the podcast waits for no man, and certainly not
Or
you,
woman.
Scott. Or woman, yes, nope. James, how have you been?
I'm good. Been a few really busy weeks. We've had a lot going on. I think every week when you ask me for my thoughts at the end of the podcast, it's always like, we've got heaps of stuff going on, yada, yada, yada. I was on a Mercedes-Benz event last week, test driving the new GLC 43 and the E-Class sedan. So I can't talk too much about them yet, but I will be able to speak more about them very soon.
Let me guess, they are like a Mercedes. Maybe.
More or
not.
less.
Stacks up,
Yeah, it does make sense. Well, we will report on that soon. We are, much to your request, going to talk about the BYD Sealion 6 today. There was an outcry of demand for it, so we are going to get to that. But first, we're going to talk about the thing that we missed by about 5 minutes last week. We sent the podcast live, and 5 minutes later, Toyota Prado pricing came out. So it's now the 250 series, which is... Well, the last one was the 150 series. We get it here as a Toyota LandCruiser Prado. In the States, it's known as the Toyota LandCruiser.
And Europe as well, I think.
Yeah, they don't have a
Europe
LandCruiser
anymore,
like we know it there. It's very confusing, but what's not confusing is the price. It's much more expensive. And I'll pass it over to you guys. You can run through some of the details that we now know officially.
So it starts at $72,500 for the GX, and it runs to knocking on the door of 100 grand, pretty much 100 grand on the nose before on road costs. For the range topping model. The VX, which is sort of the mid-range model, it's a very popular option, is $87,400. It's $10,500 more expensive than the one it replaces.
That's a lot.
It is. It's a really significant increase, especially when you consider, although it is a new version, if you look at the spec sheet, it's got the same engine as before. I'm really curious to see how buyers respond because times are tough at the moment. Interest rates keep rising. Car sales we expect to start slowing down, although we've been saying that for a long time.
We're still expecting it at some point, aren't we?
Yeah, we've been expecting it for a while now.
Yeah, we're at the end of financial year and it's still not slowing down. Well, deliveries aren't slowing down. New car sales are a different story and we'll see the on-flow effect. James, you've been across Toyota with their V-Active hybrid, well, they don't call it a hybrid system, but their V-Active hybrid system for a while now, which is what is going into Prado. Yeah. So do you want to tell everybody a little bit about the engine configuration we've now got?
Yeah, so the 2.8 litre diesel is basically a development of the one that we know pretty well. The V-Active technology is basically a 48 volt mild hybrid system, and Toyota's been very careful not to call it a hybrid. So it basically extends the idle stop-start function, which is new for the Prado in Australia. Previously, we didn't have that option. And I think under load, it might assist the engine ever so slightly, but the outputs are so minimal that it probably doesn't really make much of a difference. Another big change is the fact that it's moved to an 8-speed automatic as opposed to the old 6-speed. So more ratios. It should mean on the highway, the engine will be a little less stressed. You'll be able to cruise in at a lower RPM. It'll probably help fuel efficiency by somewhat. I think with the Hilux anyway, Toyota was claiming around a 10% improvement in combined fuel economy. I think that combined with the better transmission and all the various other upgrades that this new Prado has, it could be a bigger difference while it's also increased capability with better towing and that kind of stuff as well.
Now, we recently tested the Hilux. The review is live on the website and on YouTube. We noted the 48 volt system didn't really make much of a difference to the drivability, but and it's probably the same with this. It's probably not going to change that much. But that 8-speed, like you said, it's going to make a huge difference in terms of towing, fuel economy. But they've finally gone 3.5 tonne with towing. Now, where do you guys think? You talk to a lot of people in the market quite regularly. Do you think this is a game changer for Toyota with Prado?
Look, I think Toyota could have kept selling the old Prado for a lot longer and people would have still bought it. It has this incredible ability with the LandCruiser and the Prado to just talk to people where they want to be spoken to. I think 3,500 kilos is a step forward though, because you look at now the Everest, in particular the Platinum V6, and that is an $80-something thousand car, but it's got 3.5 tonne towing, it's got quite a luxurious interior, it's much more grown up, and it was making the old Prado feel old. So the fact the numbers now stack up, the fact it now looks much more grown up, and the fact the interior is much more modern are all really crucial things, and I think will make people second guess whether they do buy that Everest or whether they go to a new competitor like a Tank 500 and instead stick with the tried and tested Toyota name. I think also the model walk, even though this is much more expensive, makes a lot of sense Because for a long time there, Toyota had sort of crossover between the Fortuner and the Prado. And now if you look at the way that Toyota four-wheel drive range sets up, you've got the Fortuner, the Prado goes on top of that, you've got the LandCruiser 300 on top of that, and the Lexus GX on top of that. And it's quite a logical line from entry-level Fortuner to top-spec LandCruiser, which hasn't really been the case previously. So I think as well, as much as I'd love to see the 4Runner replace the Fortuner, there is some logic to how they're walking through those models now, and it does make more sense with the old Prado gone.
Yes, and one of the things, I've been saying this for years, the Fortuner was the wrong name for that car. It's like, when they brought out the last Commodore, the ZB Commodore, shouldn't have called it Commodore.
Yeah.
They should have just called it the Hilux Surf, and they would have sold heaps of them.
Yeah.
People would have known what it was then. But now, James, I hear you bang on about this in the office quite a lot, so let's get a little nerdy for a second here with it. TNGA, that is the platform in which basically all these Land Cruiser series vehicles are built on. Do you just want to explain a little bit about how underneath the new Prado, it shares a lot with the 300 series and the Lexus
so
products?
TNGA is the umbrella term for Toyota's new modular architecture family. The Land Cruiser series, I can't remember, I think it's F. Is it F or G?
F, yeah, frame.
F is for the one that's got a separate frame and chassis. So it's still a ladder frame chassis, but it's obviously been developed to, house all these new tech that they are putting into the cars, improves handling, all that kind of stuff. And so the move to that, for the Land Cruiser 300, you think about how big of a change that was in terms of how the car handled, the kind of tech they could put in it, the new engines that they're able to put in it, all that kind of stuff. For the Prado, it should mean that I think the wheelbase now is the same as the 300 series. So it's going to be a bigger car internally, I think, in terms of how it sits. And also, you have all the new driver assist tech, which the old one's probably about 2 generations or 3 generations behind the rest of the back now. You'll see all of Toyota's latest infotainment stuff, all that kind of thing. So it's a major technology upgrade, and then it should also be better driving, more efficient, and all of that stuff as well.
Now, look, sorry, Scott, I just want to touch on the looks really quickly because you mentioned it just before. Not everyone's going to agree with this. I think the new Prado looks fantastic.
Totally agree.
Do you think that in terms of just looking at it compared to the Lexus, I think the Toyota now looks better than the Lexus does, but that's a matter of opinion. Where do you guys stand on that?
Look, I think the new GX, which is kind of the equivalent Lexus, I think it looks cooler again. It's got this sort of almost cartoony ruggedness about it. I do think the Prado, though, it now stands out in a way it didn't. The old one, when you look at it, is very tall and narrow, whereas this new one has the big sort of wide shoulders and hips of a Land Cruiser. It's much more grown up, and if you are spending $100,000 on one, you kind of need that, right? It needs to justify that price. So I think Toyota's done a good job.
What do you think, James?
I think if they had made the Heritage Edition look the standard look with like the round headlights and that kind of thing, that would have been like a cherry on top. I think the way that they've managed to make it look retro but modern, the proportions, like Scott said, are really, really nice compared to the old one. Some people might miss the spare wheel on the back. I don't know what people's opinions are on that, but I think it looks great and the interior is a huge upgrade. So I think it can only mean good things for Prado.
The TNGA thing's interesting because TNGA is not the same platform for every car. So the Corolla is built on a version of TNGA, as is the Lexus LS. They're not the same platform, but TNGA is kind of the family and they all have different designations. Regardless of the fact they have different designations and different goals, one of the things Toyota does really well is provide a consistent feel across its cars. And that is from the Corolla all the way through to the Land Cruiser. There are certain controls and inputs and things that you do that it's from a Toyota because ultimately the way it responds is the same across the whole TNGA lineup. And I'm curious to know how the Prado fits in that, whether it will feel like a smaller Land Cruiser, whether they'll try and tune it to feel like a bigger RAV4. I don't know. But what Toyota has done really well is give its cars a consistent feel and consistent feedback across the controls, regardless of whether they're a massive Land Cruiser or a little Yaris.
Well, that's their marketing campaign with the BZ4X at the moment. Like it's a Toyota, right? So I guess that makes a lot of sense. All right, your money on the table. Would you be splurging for the Lexus? Going with the, I can't say tried and tested anymore, but a somewhat tried and tested Prado, or going for the V6 Everest, which is a damn sight cheaper than the new Prado. Well, I'll throw it out. Who wants to go first?
I don't know yet. I think we have to drive it first. It's kind of hard to tell because I think like you say, the Prado has that tried and tested name. People resonate with that name in terms of reliability and all that kind of stuff. The new capability sounds really good, but because it's such a big change in terms of tech and feel and look and everything, I think we need to actually get a better idea of how that translates into the real world before we can start telling people, save 20 grand and get the Ford or, get the equivalent Toyota. I think that's my take on it anyway.
I think as it stands, the Everest is a really strong option, and at 20 grand cheaper than a top spec Prado, the Prado is going to have to be a really good thing to justify that. So without having driven the car, the Everest for me makes a lot of sense, but I've constantly been surprised by new Toyota and Lexus products recently. They're always, I suppose, better than you expect. So with that in mind, I'm not quite ready to write it off just yet.
Fair enough. Well, what would you guys buy? Are you rushing out to order a new Prado? Have you already placed an order for a GX? Or have you bought an Everest and you're happy to stick with that? Leave a comment and let us know. All right. Due to popular demand, we're going to talk about it. It's the BYD Sealion 6. I'm going to hand it straight over to you, James. You went down to our proving ground to do an early drive of the Sealion 6. So tell us everything that everyone wants to know about it.
Yeah, okay. So the Sealion 6 is a new, they call it mid-size, but it's a pretty big mid-size SUV. It's about 4.7 metres long.
So that's bigger than a RAV4.
Yeah, it's closer to an Outlander, and it's still a two-row SUV. It's the first plug-in hybrid that BYD has released in Australia, because previously all their cars have been electric. But that's not to say that BYD is new to plug-in hybrids. They've been doing them for a really, really long time. So the Sealion 6 is kind of like the SUV companion to the Seal sedan. It was previously known as the Seal U for export. Now it's Sealion 6 as a PHEV. The Seal U is electric in some markets. It's very confusing.
Do BYD just open like an animal, like sea animal book and just point? And
well, in China it's the Song Plus, so I don't know which animal or marine.
I'm just craving sushi.
Yeah. I don't think we're allowed to eat that anymore.
Well, no, not sea lion, definitely not. Wrong country as well, I realise, but the aquarium theme is really...
Yeah, they're sticking with it. But anyway, it is very cheap though. It's less than 50 grand plus on road.
So the base model is 48,990 plus on-road costs, and I use the term base model very loosely because it actually, the two different variants really differentiate by drivetrain. So the base one is a naturally aspirated 1.5 litre petrol engine with a plug-in hybrid system. They're all the same battery, but the high-spec one is a turbocharged petrol engine with an extra electric motor for all-wheel drive. So it gets a lot more power. It's about 3 seconds quicker to 100, but the range and all that kind of stuff is all very much the same. So it's the same battery, same fuel tank, all that kind of thing. So BYD claims very, very strong fuel efficiency for the first 100 Ks with a battery charge. So you'll get between 1.1 and 1.5 litres per 100 Ks, that's the claim. Anywhere between 81 and 93 Ks of electric range, which is pretty high. And then combined, BYD is saying that you'll get between like 970 and 1,070 kilometres per full tank of fuel and full battery. So they're really going hard on the fact that even though it drives like an EV first, it takes away that range anxiety, and even operating as a conventional hybrid, you'll still get decent enough efficiency that you can get between Melbourne and Sydney without having to fill up or recharge, which is pretty big numbers.
I know the made in China tag scares a lot of people, but BYD know what they're doing when it comes to batteries. I mean, this is what they do as a company.
They specialise in,
time. Yeah, like they have been building batteries in devices that you've probably been using for a long time prior to going into the car game. I'm curious though, this is one complaint we often have of the Outlander, ignoring the PHEV stuff, Scott. We'll come to that.
Let's not ask him.
The Outlander has, a 2.4 litre, 4-cylinder petrol, is it? I think, but naturally aspirated, it's so wheezy. And when you run out of electricity, it's gutless. It's gutless. Let's put it that. Is that the same problem that you're going to see? Because 1.5 litre naturally aspirated is not a lot of go, but a 2 litre turbo sounds right on the money. Is that?
Well, it's actually a 1.5 litre turbo for the high-spec one. No. So the main thing that BYD really drove home with us is that it only ever really becomes a parallel hybrid where it actually uses the petrol engine to drive the wheels at at the absolute limit. It'll otherwise be a series hybrid, much like the Outlander might default to, or like a Nissan X-Trail e-Power, in that it's more used as a generator to power the battery, which then drives the electric motor. So in that sense, it can probably sit at a more cruisy RPM and not constantly be going up and down to make sure that the response is still maintained as like EV drive, whilst also using the petrol engine as more of a backup generator. But it's still, we only drove the turbocharged one at the launch, which is all-wheel drive, and it quotes like 230 kilowatts. It's pretty peppy, but that's mainly coming from the electric motors.
Right.
So it feels pretty quick. They claim a sub 6 second 0 to 100 for that all-wheel drive model.
We'll be the judge of that.
Yeah, we'll be the judge of that, but it definitely felt quick. I did a couple of sedating starts with that car with no timing gear or anything like that, but it definitely feels responsive. The same way that we found with the Outlander. It definitely feels responsive in that sense. I don't know whether it's a 5 something second car, but it's still definitely pretty quick.
And what about the interior? Because the Atto 3 is the first BYD I drove, and it's really nicely put together, but it's quite funky. There's some weird interiors and layouts.
The guitars on the door.
The guitar strings on the door and the muscle tendon dashboard.
Yep.
Muscle tendon.
That's what it's meant to look like, genuinely.
Right.
They want it to
Okay.
be like a sinewy... Anyway, Sealion 6 is aimed at a different segment. Does it feel a bit more conventional and upmarket?
Yeah, it definitely does. And that was one of the first things that really took me when I first sat in it, because it's got, with Chinese brands obviously coming a long way in terms of fit and finish, design, and all that kind of stuff. But this felt immediately more familiar than the other BYD products that we've had through the garage. It's a little more, it definitely doesn't try to make too much of a statement. There are some interesting colors. The base upholstery is like a black leatherette with like a tan insert and orange piping, which is still a little bit out there for some people. And then for the top spec model, you can also option that white on blue color that's pretty common amongst BYD's vehicles now. But everything is much more conventional. You still have that rotating screen, but it's more integrated into the dash more than some of the other cars where it sort of pops out the top, and the instrument cluster is recessed into a binnacle, much like we're used to with a lot of other modern cars. And everything just feels, it's a mix of a lot of different brands in terms of the design too. Like on the outside, they're plugging their European design language. So it has a lot of elements of various brands. Like we were sitting there looking at it while it was sitting out there, and there's like a little bit of Aston Martin DBX, a little bit of like Volkswagen Arteon at the back, and there's a few other things that sort of go into the silhouette. And inside there's a mixture of like Volkswagen, Mercedes, those kinds of things. And we're seeing a lot of that with the Chinese brands. There's a lot of mixtures of other influences in there. And it all feels like quite familiar and comfortable. And it doesn't feel quite as, some of the other Chinese brands, I find the tech integration is not very cohesive and can feel a little bit foreign and trying to get used to everything. This definitely felt a lot more familiar, and the switchgear was laid out more like you would expect. So it's still, you get in it and it's not your Toyota or Mitsubishi.
It's a bit different and new.
Yeah, but it's definitely fresh without being too polarizing, or it won't alienate people, in my opinion. So yeah.
All right, speaking of alienating people, plug-in hybrid. I know Scott is not a fan. One day you could explain yourself to people.
I actually, on this car, the fact that it's got up to 90 k's of electric range makes a heap more sense to me. And I think there is a distinction to be made between the plug-in hybrids we've been talking about for quite a long time, which will do 40 k's in the real world, and one that can do 80. 40 k's will struggle to get. It'll get the average Australian to and from work, but anything beyond that, unless you charge every night, it won't do. 80 k's means that the average Aussie, which I think is about 35 k's a day, can go to and from work for a couple of days. Maybe you can miss a charge, you can go on a longer drive, and you're still leaning on predominantly electric power, which fundamentally changes the conversation. And I'm open to the tech if it can offer more to people like that. I also think the fact that BYD uses the engine to charge the battery predominantly rather than trying to drive it like a RAV4 hybrid, that makes a lot of sense to me as well. So I'm looking forward to experiencing it, because I'm not closed off to the tech entirely. I just think often with the ones that are on sale in Australia at the moment, they don't offer enough of a benefit for the additional cost you pay.
Except for the Ferrari SF90.
Yeah, which is a practical, sensible car that we all compare with the BYD Sealion.
For my household, it's the perfect family car because it fits both of us. So that's all I need. In terms of the plug-in hybrid system, what sort of charge time are we looking at if you were to, say, plug it in at a 50 kilowatt charger out in the country somewhere?
So the Sealion 6 can be fast charged, but it won't charge up to 50 kilowatts. I think it's in the 20s, and so it will take you like a couple of hours to charge it up at that rate. It also has a vehicle to load function. So sort of like what we've seen out of Hyundai and Kia's electric vehicles, you can plug an adapter in and, we made a coffee with it.
The top spec Outlander's been able to do that for a while as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that kind of thing. So it won't take you too long to fast charge it. But it won't charge like an EV will at like a 350 kilowatt charger, for example.
So you plug it in overnight, it should be ready to go.
I think that's what they're really driving home here. Is the main thing is you can just start a day with a full charge, do whatever you need to do, come home and charge again at night. And you can do that via a 3-pin socket and have it comfortably charge fully overnight. And then you just use it as you normally would and fill up as you need. And if you can charge it, great. If you can't, you don't have to stress. So it's also got the LFP batteries in them. So I know some people are really into the discrepancies between like lithium ion phosphate, yada, yada, yada. And this one is meant to be better for fast charging more often. And the Blade battery is quite renowned for its safety because it's quite a thin battery, and it passes the nail test is one that constantly comes up. So it doesn't like just burst into flames when it gets penetrated by by an external source. And I know how that just sounded, so let's move on.
Not commenting on that one.
Yes. So your money on the table, Outlander or the Sealion 6? I'm going to struggle to say that name forever, but Outlander or Sealion 6?
Well, look, I think the equivalent Outlander is quite substantially more than the Sealion 6. You know,
You're looking at least 75 if you want a reasonable one. With
well, that's
Outlander.
the thing. So base pricing alone, the Sealion is about 10 grand in the clear. And so for that alone will make people think, well, you know, do I save that money for whatever else I can use? I think the Sealion 6 is a really, really compelling offering. I'm very comfortable in saying it's probably the best Chinese car I've driven, Chinese branded Chinese car that I've driven so far. And the first 3,000 customers get a free home charger with their purchase. So there's another little thing thrown in there to make that transition easier if you're not sure whether you want like a wall box or charger.
So it's like a single phase, like 7 kilowatt.
Something like that,
12 kilowatt
yeah.
charger,
So
something like that.
the details are on their website. But yeah, so it's like the first 3,000 customers get one of those. So that sweetens the deal a little bit too. And I think it's super well equipped. It's a really good size, and the value just is really, really hard to ignore. So that's, I think, a few things that it gets over the Mitsubishi, but the Mitsubishi is really good too.
Scott, I know you're not going to like to answer this, but this is your job.
It's impossible to ignore the price difference. I haven't driven the Sealion, but I obviously trust what James thinks of it. And based on that, I think $25,000 or $20,000 price difference is just too much to ignore. So I'm looking forward to having a go to confirm that. But in the meantime, the BYD shapes up as a really interesting option.
The two things that it's missing, they don't have Russell Coight as their spokesperson, but also just, one thing that before we move on, the dealer network with BYD is, well, I guess it's young. Let's just call it young. And it's emerging, and there's not many. Whereas Mitsubishi, pretty much anywhere you go in the country, you're going to find a Mitsubishi dealer. Is that something that BYD are working on currently? They're trying to get more dealers out there, or a bit of a wider, at least a wider mechanical network?
Yeah, definitely. And they're working on doing better with their servicing as well. Because I think at the beginning there were questions over their warranty because certain things were covered by certain warranty disclaimers and that kind of stuff. And then their servicing network was the MyCar. Third party.
Yeah, it was all handled through a third party called EV Direct.
Whereas now they have dedicated BYD service centres in select regions, but then you can also go to the MyCar network if that's what's more local. So those things are all in progress now. But the warranty thing is, Mitsubishi's 10-year warranty is a really great thing to drive home. And plus there's 10 years of servicing, capped price servicing. So many terms. But yeah, so those things would definitely help if you plan on keeping it a long time and need that added peace of mind. And the fact, BYD is still a new brand. So hopefully they stick around and things are really good for them. But for a lot of people who think about those things before they purchase, that's something to consider as well.
And obviously there's FBT exemptions and all those sort of things that you can look into. But yeah, okay, so it's really the external things with the car you're going to have to consider if you're thinking about buying this or the Outlander. That's really what you've got to look at. All right, it's time for our picks of the week. It wouldn't be a Car Expert podcast without it. James, I'm going to throw it to you first. What have you got this week?
So I stumbled upon this video from Supercars of Europe. This guy was walking through somewhere in the UK and stumbled across this Aston Martin V8 sportsman thing. It's like this little shooting brake that they did of the 1990s Vantage, and apparently there's only one of two in the world, and someone just had it parked down in the street. So I don't know if you remember, like Gran Turismo 3, there was that era of Aston Martin Vantage with like a supercharged V8 and like had the round tail lights at the back. They made a shooting brake version. So from like the B pillar forward, it looks just like the standard coupe, quite muscular, squared off. And then at the back, it's got this like bespoke rear end treatment, which is like a square boxy wagon, but with like curved haunches and everything. It's quite fascinating. There's only one of two. So what a cool find.
Yeah, very cool. All right, Scott, what do you got?
I've gone a different approach. Sean, you and I were away last week on a CarExpert event with Albors and Paul.
Yes.
And I actually want to flash up a photo now from a go-karting race we did.
Oh, and why would you like to do that, Scott?
Well, it's funny, Sean. At 6'7" and more than 100 kilos, I'm not built like a racing driver, but despite that, I managed to win our second race.
Oh, I can already see Paul writing a comment on YouTube for this.
And best of luck to him. I look forward to declining it. It was a really, really cool little track out of Queenstown in New Zealand, like beautiful in the hills.
Highlands Motorsport Park in Cromwell, New Zealand. If you don't know it, they hold the New Zealand Grand Prix there every year, which is it's one of Tony Quinn's facility is just stunning.
But I would recommend going for some scenic go-karting in the fresh New Zealand air. I would also recommend meeting your co-workers because it's very satisfying.
And check out the Lube with the View while you're there.
Yes, exactly.
All right, mine is even further afield from cars than yours is. No race cars this week. I'm talking about aeroplanes.
Oh, look out.
Amazon Prime just dropped the Blue Angels documentary. The Blue Angels are the US Navy's air show fighter pilot group that fly a bunch of FA-18s and do demonstration things, inverted flying and formation stuff. They just released a documentary about it, and it is awesome. I mean, don't even watch it for the story. Just watch it for the aerial shots of the Blue Angels doing their thing. It is absolutely mega. And to see those aircraft from the air and be with them and like GoPro shots inside whilst they're doing their formation, they're flying like a couple of inches away from one another, is just mind-boggling how they do it. But definitely check it out if you have Amazon Prime, the Blue Angels documentary. You can probably buy it on Apple TV or whatever. Worth a watch. But that brings us to the end this week, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just looking forward to seeing what's next in Formula One after Monaco. That's been a really interesting period.
And who's next in the Alpine seat and who's next in the Williams seat.
But yeah, it's much more open at the moment than it has been for a long time, which is exciting.
Yes. I mean, Red Bull are sort of, it's not that they're nowhere, but they're
just not miles out in front anymore.
Last year, yeah. So, we'll find out in Canada very shortly. James, anything from you?
My one's probably a little bit closer to home. I'm going to be driving the new Suzuki Swift this week.
Oh, very exciting.
I'm very excited for, just because of what that car means for the brand and, affordable motoring in Australia. It's something that we've seen a big departure from, as a lot of brands have sort of moved away from the small entry-level segments. I think this is going to be a really interesting a very interesting indication of what affordable motoring looks like moving forward. So more to talk about very soon.
That'll be one of the cheapest small cars in Australia, I think.
Exactly.
We'll see what MG
should be,
does.
though.
MG comes and undercuts them like they typically do. But something to look forward to on a future Car Expert podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, follow us, leave a comment. If you have any feedback for us, write to us, podcast@carexpert.com.au. But until next time, take it easy.